I believe Ronald Reagan deserves a place up there on Mount Rushmore. You ought to put FDR there too, but otherwise it's a pretty good list of presidents. The thing that probably entitles him to that place more than anything else is that he won the Cold War. I mean, you give FDR credit for winning World War II, and Lincoln credit for winning the Civil War, and Washington credit for the Revolution. Give Reagan credit for winning the Cold War. Reagan understood something that none of the other Cold War theorists or international commentators or observers understood. None of them understood it. That the internal contradictions of the Soviet system were so glaring that if you subjected it to maximum economic pressure and also the demand for huge expenditures on armaments, it would implode, and you'd have exactly the situation that occurred in 1989 and 1991. He got it, and he understood that just as World War I was won by the West because of a matter of attrition of manpower, when Woodrow Wilson added our 120 million Americans to the scales, where there were roughly 80 million British and French and 60 million Germans, and then he put 120 million Americans on it, Germany knew it couldn't compete. World War II was won by industrial mobilization. When FDR added the industrial capabilities of the United States to produce weapons to those of Britain and other allies, it absolutely tilted the scale, and Germany couldn't compete. Reagan understood that the Cold War would be won by economic pressure. So he did a whole series of steps to make the Soviet Union implode. First, he went to South Africa, and he said there are only two major exports of Russia, gold and oil. And he went to South Africa and got them to increase gold production dramatically. And as a result, the price of gold fell, and the Russian exports didn't matter much. Then he went to Saudi Arabia, and he got them to increase their oil production. The price of oil fell, and Russia was suddenly bereft of international currency. Then he went to Afghanistan, and he gave the Afghan rebels, the future Taliban, but still, Stinger missiles that could effectively knock down Soviet helicopters. And the Russians began to bleed to death in Afghanistan, just like we began to bleed in the Vietnam War. But of course, Russia has a lot less blood than we did. I mean, a lot less wealth, a lot less ability to sustain it. And we also have the Western Europe and Japan backing us up financially. Then the big thing is he went to the Russians and he said, okay, guys, you want an arms race, you're going to get an arms race. He dramatically increased our defense spending. It went from about $150 billion a year to about $350 billion over a space of 6 years. Huge increases, increases Russia couldn't possibly hope to match. The current CIA estimates are that Russia was spending about 12 or 13% of its GDP on defense when Reagan took office. We were spending about 3%. And when Reagan raised us to 7, he forced the Russians to go up to 21. And that just absolutely ate the vitals out of the Russian system. And then he scared them to death with Star Wars, which never would have worked in terms of the massive Soviet arsenal. It would work now against North Korea and Iran, and we need it. But against the Soviet arsenal with 12,000 weapons, you couldn't hope to knock every one of those warheads down. But it scared the hell out of the Russians, and they began to work hard to catch up, and they were so far behind in computers and technology that it was a forlorn effort, but it consumed a huge amount of their resources. So with all of these pressures placed on the Soviet Union, and withholding international loans, and withholding American wheat, the ultimate result was this implosion of the Soviet Union. It just collapsed economically because it could not sustain that pressure. And Reagan is the guy who orchestrated that. And we have to look back at Reagan's hawkish policies with that in mind. Now, Reagan did increase the federal budget deficit enormously to pay for the defense budget increases and pay for his tax cuts that swelled economic growth to help us overwhelm Russia economically. But he had Britain and France and Germany and Japan and the whole rest of the world to lend us money, even China a little bit back then. And we paid for our deficit, and then under Clinton, we eliminated that deficit. Bush and Obama increased it again. But Clinton basically paid off Reagan's debt. And it worked. It worked beautifully. So this guy deserves an incredible amount of credit. all the more so because he was the only person that got it. There were plenty of people around Reagan who got it. Cheney understood it completely. Casey, who was head of the CIA, who died during Reagan's term, he understood it and helped formulate this. Frank Gaffney at the Defense Department, Richard Pearl at the Defense Department, Wolfson, all of them really were part and parcel of this strategy. But it's Ronald Reagan who deserves the credit. Thanks for watching.